Let me first go to the sponsors of the different sessions. Ladies and gentlemen, would you like to give them an ovational round of applause? Steven van Rijswijk, Bas Marteijn, Marguerite, Bérard and Vincent Maagdenberg. There you are, Bas, Marguerite, Steven. Yes, go ahead. Grab a seat, and let's go. All right. Welcome back, everyone. What I'd like, we have 15 minutes. That is indeed a very short time. What I'd like to do is get a 2-minute management summary of what you've all been talking about, and then we have still some time to talk on speed, for instance, or collaboration. Maybe Marguerite, to start with you. What is it that stick to mind if we talk about European values?
Okay. So first of all, it was a highly passionate debate.
Okay, great.
Highly philosophical, ethical. I mean, we called on Kant and everything. It was flying quite high, so
okay.
We're quite proud of ourselves, number one. Number two, we went back to the origins of the EU, calling on Robert Schuman and all the founding fathers.
Wow.
Remembering that they had wanted to create in a pragmatic way links between the 6 original member states of Europe in order for an economic links in order through trade and these dependencies to make sure that war would never happen again in Europe, and that basically in a pragmatic way Europe had achieved that as well. We reflected on the fact that maybe with enlargements and so on, sometimes Europe is shying away from political questions, and sometimes we hide behind, making discussions highly technical and discussing this and that directive in order to make sure that we don't have the real political debate. And maybe we needed to,
address that more.
And that, ties to values as well. An example of a dilemma was, for instance, the situation Euroclear is finding itself into, regarding, fraudulent Russian assets,
right?
Exactly, yeah. And the situation in Belgium and so on, and wondering, how do you deal with this dilemma? And is it for a private company to bear the burden, or is it a European decision taken by governments?
Right. Yeah.
We also reflected on AI, and we had an interesting case that was that we had to debate, and it was basically a very mean American AI company with a very good technology, but they were really mean.
Yep,
and so the question was that, can we use their technology or not? And then some of us decided that the question was not framed the right way, because the right question we wanted to answer is that, how do we make sure we have AI companies in Europe so that we build European sovereignty? So we decided not to answer that question, but frame it differently, because we thought that this was already, suffering from a Stockholm syndrome, that, Europe should not think of itself as just, hey, big dilemma on ethics on whether or not we can use US tech, but how do we make sure that, we don't, we can have this tech in Europe.
So more of like, because that's what I saw on the screen, it's more on the, we shouldn't be a victim, but we should be more passionate about Europe and more proud?
Yeah, we just decided, how do we make sure that Gutenberg, Marconi, les Frères Lumière, whatever, that we finance them in Europe.
Yeah.
That's what we care about.
And
that was really lively and passionate, I can tell you.
I love it. And did you talk about the role of the banks in that sense?
And did we talk about?
The role of the banks.
The role of the banks? Well, as... No, I think we had various discussions on that. One included how, after the great financial crisis, banks had to, rebuild their trust and link to society, and that was, instrumental.
Right.
And then, back to how we view our role. We are, the blood in the economy. So how do we make sure we help Europe taking the right risk so that Europe is stronger?
Okay. Thanks, Marguerite. Let's go to you, Vincent, because you had the resilience session. What stick to mind? What did the audience say? Well, you have to say that to the people here.
Now, maybe linked to the previous point, it's also here, strong banks, strong society. So yeah, we can be part of the solution. And I think that is what we may not necessarily have been thinking in the last 10 years, but now we are just stepping forward in order to be part of that solution. It is a balance between creating fear and realism.
Mm-hmm.
So also there, how do you do that? How to make sure that people are not just simply getting scared? Invest in fallback scenarios. I think that is an important one. And it was already mentioned, the weaponization of everything. So should we only think about Europe, or should we also look at the game that is being played by the US and also China, and play a little bit along as well? And so not being stuck in, let's say, the rule of law bubble that we are in, but also just stretch it a bit.
So if we're investing somewhere, we can ask for something back, right? That was the thesis there. So on the resilient part, Marguerite alluded to that with AI. Should we be thinking about who are we dealing with if we look at our providers? Is that something that came up?
For us, yeah, definitely. So ultimately, the dependency is enormous. And so how can we mitigate that? And so how should we invest together, collectively in Europe?
Yeah.
But then the question is how? And so how do we mobilize, and how are we going to make sure that we choose for those European solutions?
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's interesting. Why is that so hard? You have the money, you have the power to decide, and you say we always choose for a European solution.
Yeah, I think the urgency is growing, so clearly. However, the political landscape is more difficult in order to also get a bit of support from that direction.
Okay. Steven,
Yeah.
circularity. What was the gist of the discussion?
The gist was that it is not easy. But, well, first of all, there was an enormous amount of energy in the room. So there was a good presentation, academic presentation about, okay, how to go about system change. How to go from a system that we have now to a better system. And what I really liked about that was, don't look at the what in terms of what are the goals exactly, but in terms of what is the vision, what a certain sector will then look like at the end of it, and then come back to all the steps that you need to take. But of course, for every change, there is a lot of resistance, and how then to go through these process steps. The good thing is, but I'm sure that the NVB will share that, is that the academic sector, including Nijrode, has over 150 plans how to deal with the different steps of system change and how to go about that. So we can all use it as inspiration. That is maybe one. The second point is that we had Marteijn van der Pol. He's the CEO of Mine, which is a metal collection company, and therefore being used in a circular economy. I think, and he spoke very much about it is cheaper now to collect metals and export that to outside of Europe because I get a better price than inside, or I don't yet have the people that want to offtake my metals because there are no requirements as much as yet for people in smelters, for example, to actually take a certain percentage of my recycled metals. And I think that the main lesson there is it is not one size fits all. Like I said in the beginning, it's not about the why and the what, but it's about the how. And the how is different for different sectors. And we need to really understand well what are the sectoral challenges. And those are not, there's not one silver bullet, but to make sure that in the entire ecosystem that we then can solve it. And banks are a part of that, but also private equity is, and the governments are, and the sector is, and the off-takers are. So not one size fits all, but really focus per sector. And the third element we talked about, that was with Steven van Eyck. He's the convoy for circular economy in the Netherlands, special convoy for circular economy in the Netherlands, is that, and I think we've all seen that, is that in the past we talked about sustainability, but he said the way that we speak now about it is much more about resilience and is about the economy.
Yeah.
And where is, I think, that helpful is that to a larger part of the population or societies, rather than saying who takes the moral high ground and who's the most morale here in society, that we say, okay, but how do we really make it work? Yeah. And using things as resilience and economy, how can we build them into economic models, is closer to many than what we talked about in the past, and I think that would be very helpful.
Right. So I think it's interesting in the Draghi report. He's talking a lot about decarbonization, but he couples it with not with sustainability, but with being independent, right? And that story sticks maybe more than only focusing on sustainability. And that's what.
That's it.
All right. What's the role of banks?
Well, I think threefold. First of all, of course, we finance the transition, and some circularity or sustainability models we can finance easier than others, but there's part that we can finance ourselves. Two, we can help to bring together companies and our clients who are either suppliers or off-takers, and private equity and seed capital, because many of these players are also clients or suppliers to us, so that we can bring an entire ecosystem in the room, or separate sectors, like we're doing, for example, with the global textile sector. And thirdly, I think we can play a good role in lobbying with different governments in terms of what does need to happen through the value chain.
Yeah, I get it. Bas Marteijn, let's go to competitiveness. We need competitiveness if we want to do all the other things, right?
Right.
So what came out of your discussion?
No, indeed, the pie needs to be big in order to be sharing everybody.
I love the pie. Yeah.
And we need a bigger pie. Look, I think in my breakout session, it was very much about acknowledging how complex and how big the work at hand was. And 11% progress on a Draghi report, that's too little. So one of the common denominators that we had is let's focus on a few points that we can really make progress. Let's focus on the themes. Let's focus on the industries where we want to be showing progress in order to have real successes and to show tangible progress in some of these chapters, because it is a self-fulfilling flywheel that needs to start turning for it to really attract the willingness to invest in it.
All right.
On the banks, we were talking about, so what's the role of the banks in all this? One point that came up is show transparency in terms of what in an investment agenda that is more entrepreneurial, what's available and what you can do. Also maintain a high duty of care, because with higher investors, with higher investing comes higher risk, and that goes wrong statistically as well. And of course, there's also on the table, can banks do more? Why don't you give more leverage, banks, to all these scaling and scale-up things that you can do? And then banks can typically say, well, wait a minute, that's equity, that's not us.
Yeah.
But that needs to be a conscious dialogue, and there needs to be also an institute that fills that gap between what banks can do and where the markets and entrepreneurs want to be. Europe has a few initiatives like that. The Netherlands also needs to be stepping up its ideas around an investment institution. There's good progress now in preparing for that, but it really needs a bigger and more impactful scenario there as well. In closing, everybody is talking about, let's do this together. We need to do this together. But it actually also means that in our breakout, people really understood that working together is also a different lingo for let's compromise. It needs compromises to go forward.
Yeah.
In the Mentimeter, you saw people calling out urgency, leadership, female leadership. Act now. There is a bubbling need for getting progress going.
Yeah.
And that's $1 billion question. How do we get progress going?
So I was wondering for the final 3 minutes. So you all have a bank to run, right? That's your day job, right? And here we're talking about banking and society. So I guess maybe, Marguerite, you can allude to that. There's a dilemma there. One, you have a bank to run, that's your most important job. On the other hand, we as a society need you to help us be resilient, more competitive, more et cetera, et cetera. Where do we find ourselves? Do we dare as banks to step forward and say, yes, we're going to help? Or are you like, if we're asked, then we're going to do that? What's your take on that?
Yeah, Marguerite.
You're new in the room, right?
I think these are questions we need to handle every day. We discussed it in our session. I don't know if you remember I think it was 3 years ago, there was a really interesting summer issue of The Economist where you had, it was actually a man, pinpoint like that, overstretched like a butterfly.
Yeah.
And it was called the overstretched CEO. And basically, it referred to the situation of, it's true for banks, but also all companies, where you are asked to take stances on many societal topics.
I know. Yeah.
You know, geopolitical ones, ethical ones, on climate, on inclusion. And every time you reflect thinking, okay, I really want to do that, I care for that as a citizen, but is it my role, is it my mandate, is it what or clients or colleagues or stakeholders are going to feel comfortable? And if we make this stance, then how, are we creating a precedent?
Yeah.
What will happen next time people asking us, hey, you took a position on this, why aren't you taking one on that? So we take this very seriously. And this being said, we are Europeans, i.e. we live here. You know, it's not about being nice or not nice. We live here, our roots are here. So it means that what, you know, happens to Europe, what happens to our clients, you know, happens to us.
Yeah.
And so everything we can do to make, you know, Europe stronger is absolutely in our mandate. So, but we'll do that by doing, you know, our job, i.e. banking. Our job is to finance the economy. Our job is to channel capital to project and manage risk. This is what we do.
Yeah, but I was wondering, maybe Stephen, so I guess, but because people are very passionate about this is the sector, right? And I know you can't do that, but maybe working together and saying, well, we're taking a stance, we want to make, as banks, make Europe stronger again, make Europe great again. Is that something that would be attracted to you, or is that like, I don't want to do that?
Well, all within the limits of competition, of course. But I think what we have been trying to do, and also thank you to Mehdi for that, but I think, look, like Marguerite says, look, we are a part of society and we need to be able, therefore, to respond to society on a number of topics, mostly in terms of what we can do as banks. So where can we really add value as banks in societal topics? We can speak ourselves out on all kinds of societal topics, but seriously, as a bank, what do you then do about it? Yeah. So first of all, when we stay to the core, I think we should be quite courageous to speak us out and to speak about societal topics and how we as a banking industry see that and what we can contribute that, whether it is about sustainability or about housing or about defense or about digitalisation, all topics whereby we have a role to play and also can speak our mind in terms of this is how we see it. Now, where possible, and I think that's also what we try to do as the Dutch Banking Association, we do that together. Yeah. So that we say, this is how we stand for Europe, this is what we want to do with defense, this is how we want to finance sustainability, this is, by the way, where we feel the housing market in the Netherlands should go. That is not necessarily that we finance it or not, but more how do we think the government can stimulate it or not. So we also bring ID, we have thought leadership. And where we can, we do that together. Yeah,
great. So Vincent, because we talked about it in our session, like you have, like every Dutch citizen is a client with one of you, right? Maybe some other banks, but most of them. So you have a role to play in preparing the Dutch citizens to be resilient as well, right?
Yeah, that is our conviction. So both for the companies and also the private individuals, as long as we reach them, if they are safe, we are safe as well. So there is a vested interest for ourselves as well, that they become resilient as much as possible.
Yeah. Bas, final note. You talked about competitiveness. That is, I think, the pie should be bigger, right? What's the one thing from your session? Like we should challenge. You said prioritize, right? And the thing is, prioritize is one thing actually. That's a real priority. What is the one priority?
Look, I think all of the sessions here, in summary, they show the topics we want to be focusing on. They to some extent also are able to give a directional point in terms of where does such a file need to go. Maybe from my session, and credits to Jacqueline who was with me on stage, it also all needs a spark. It needs to be loaded with energy. Yeah. And there the reflective point that was put on the table is, hey, Europe, that's too much optimizing for not losing, whereas China and the US are optimizing for winning. Yeah. So all of that, I would like to load with that mantra in terms of winning. Credits to Jacqueline.
Ladies and gentlemen, warm round of applause. Thank you so much. Steven van Rijswijk, Bas Marteijn, Marguerite, Bérard, and Vincent Maagdenberg. Thank you so much. All right.